November 20th, 1943. The Pacific is black and endless, the kind of darkness that swallows sound and hope. Far out beyond the reef that rings Tarawa Atoll, the invasion fleet lies too. 17 aircraft carriers, 12 battleships, hundreds of transports and destroyers, the biggest armada the Pacific has ever seen. On the troopships, 18,000 United States Marines wait in the humid holds, smoking last cigarettes, writing last letters, trying not to throw up from seasickness and fear. On the main island of the atoll, Bishio, 2 miles long, half a mile wide, flat as a pool table, the Japanese garrison is awake and confident. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibazaki walks his defenses one final time before dawn. He has 4,836 men, 2,600 elite naval troops, 1,200 construction laboris turned infantry, and 1,000 Korean force laboris who will fight because they have no choice. They are dug into hundreds of coconut log bunkers roofed with steel plate and 4 feet of sand. 8-inch Vickers guns taken from Singapore Point seaward. 500 machine gun positions interlock across every beach. Shibazaki has told Tokyo, and believes himself, that Bishio cannot be taken by 1,000,000 men in 100 years. He is wrong, but no one knows that yet. At 0451 the first American reconnaissance planes drone overhead. The Japanese anti-aircraft guns open up, searchlights stabbing the sky. Below, in the troop compartments of USS Xiling, 19-year-old Private First Class Eddie Hayes from Toledo, Ohio, pulls on his dungarees and lights a lucky strike with shaking fingers. Eddie grew up driving a Ford tractor on a 160-acre farm. He has never seen salt water until this trip. His older brother is already somewhere in Italy with the 45th Infantry Division. Eddie enlisted the week after Pearl Harbor because he didn't want his mother to have 2 boys overseas and only one fighting. In his breast pocket is a wallet-sized photo of Betty Lou, his high school sweetheart, and a letter he wrote last night that begins, "Dear Mom and Dad and Betty, if you're reading this it means I caught a bad one." Aboard the attack transport USS Sheridan, Colonel David M. Shoup, commander of the 2nd Marines, stands on the bridge in a clean pair of dungarees. 47 years old, soft-spoken Kentucky drawl, already balding, Shoup looks more like a high school principal than the man about to lead the toughest amphibious assault America has ever attempted. He has studied the aerial photos until his eyes ache. He knows the reef is the problem. The Navy promised a 5-foot tide. Intelligence says it might be only 3. Shoup has argued for more Amtraks, those ugly armored landing craft that can crawl over coral. He got 125 instead of the 300 he asked for. It will have to be enough. The sky behind the fleet begins to pale. The battleships Maryland, Tennessee, and Colorado turn broadside to the island and elevate their 16-inch guns. At 0610 the world ends. For 2 hours and 20 minutes, 3,000 tons of high-explosive steel rain onto Bishio. The sound is physical, it punches men in the chest 3 miles away. Columns of sand and smoke rise 1,000 feet. From the troop decks it looks as if the entire island has been lifted into the air and set on fire. Marines cheer themselves hoarse. They think the fight is already over. It isn't even close. The Japanese are underground. Their big bunkers shrug off direct hits. When the bombardment lifts at 0850, the defenders crawl out, brush the sand off their machine guns, and wait. 8 hour. The first wave, 90 Amtraks carrying the 2nd and 3rd Battalions, 2nd Marines, starts across the lagoon. The plan is simple. The Amtraks go in first, secure a beachhead, and the Higgins boats behind them ride a rising tide straight to the sand. The tide does not rise. A freak neap tide leaves 4 feet of water over the reef instead of the expected 6. The Higgins boats hang up 500 yards out. Ramps drop. Men jump into water over their heads with 80-pound packs. The Japanese have been waiting 3 hours for this moment. Every gun on Bishio opens at once. 8-inch shells, 75mm mountain guns, 37mm anti-boat guns, heavy and light machine guns, rifles, everything fires in perfect coordination. The lagoon becomes a killing box. Men walking in shoulder-deep water simply disappear when shells land among them. Others jerk and fall as machine gun bullets slap home. The Amtraks keep moving because they have to. The steel sides ring with hits, but most make the beach. Behind them, the Higgins boats are stranded. Marines wade the last half-mile under aimed fire. Some use the bodies of the dead as stepping stones. Others swim, pushing their rifles ahead of them. Navy corpsmen swim with medical kits held overhead. The water is pink for 200 yards out. Red Beach 1, the westernmost, is lightly defended at first. Major Jim Crow lands with the first wave and immediately starts organizing. Red Beach 3 on the east takes murderous fire but hangs on. Red Beach 2, the center, is the worst. It is only 600 yards long and directly in front of Shibazaki's strongest defenses. Colonel Shoup's command boat is hit 3 times before it reaches the reef. Shoup wades the last 100 yards with blood running down his leg from shrapnel. He sets up headquarters behind the 4-foot coconut log seawall that runs the length of the beach. That wall becomes the American front line for the next 36 hours. By noon the beachheads are shallow crescents no deeper than 50 yards. Fewer than 5,000 Marines are ashore, half of them already casualties. The wounded lie in long rows behind the seawall, some quietly, some screaming. The dead are stacked like cordwood where the tide can't reach them. Ammunition is critically low. Radios are soaked and dead. The only communication is by shouting or runner. Out on the reef, the follow-up waves are still trying to get in. Boats capsize. Men drown under the weight of their packs. Navy destroyers move in close and fire point-blank over open sights to suppress the shore guns. Carrier planes from USS Leescombe Bay and USS Independence strafe and bomb, but the smoke is so thick they sometimes hit their own men. On Red Beach 2, First Lieutenant Alexander A. Bonneman, Jr., a 33-year-old mining engineer from Knoxville who left a wife and 3 daughters to enlist, decides the huge bomb-proof shelter dominating the center of the beach has to go. He gathers 21 volunteers, engineers, riflemen, anyone who can walk, and leads them in a frontal assault up the sand slope. Japanese throw grenades down the embankment. Bonneman's men throw them back. They reach the roof. Bonneman stands in the open, firing his carbine into the air vents while his men lower demolition charges. The bunker explodes in a geyser of sand and steel. Bonneman is riddled with bullets and dies on the roof. His men hold the position. It is the first real breakthrough of the day. Night falls with the Marines still trapped behind the seawall. Japanese infiltrators crawl forward in the darkness, tossing satchel charges and stabbing with bayonets. The fighting is hand-to-hand, face-to-face, often silent except for grunts and the click of knives. Marines sleep in 2-hour shifts, one man always awake with a knife between his teeth. The temperature drops into the 60s, the wounded shiver and die from shock. At 0200 a Japanese counterattack hits Red Beach 2 with 300 men screaming banzai. They are cut down 50 yards from the seawall, but not before they inflict another 100 casualties. Dawn, November 21st. The second day. The Navy has learned. Destroyers Ringgold and Dashiell steam to within 1,000 yards of the beach and pound the Japanese positions with 5-inch guns. The barrage is so close that shell fragments whistle over the Marines' heads. When it lifts, the 1st Battalion, 6th Marines lands on Green Beach at the western end of the island, an unplanned landing that becomes the turning point. Fresh troops with full ammunition begin pushing east along the south shore, rolling up the Japanese flank. Medium Sherman tanks finally rumble ashore. Colorado and China Gal lead the way, their 75mm guns blasting bunkers at point-blank range. Flamethrower teams move forward in pairs, one man with a nozzle, one with the tank on his back. The air reeks of burning diesel and human flesh. By late afternoon, the Americans control the western half of the island and the airfield. Japanese resistance begins to crack. Shibazaki tries to organize a withdrawal to the eastern tail. Most of his men refuse to leave their positions. They will fight and die where they stand. Night again. Sporadic fighting. Fewer banzai charges. More individual Japanese crawling forward to die with grenades in their hands. November 22nd. The third day. The 1st Battalion, 8th Marines lands fresh and sweeps the eastern end. First Lieutenant William D. Hawkins, a 29-year-old Texan who already has a reputation for fearless scouting, leads 4 separate attacks on a chain of steel pillboxes. He is hit 4 times and keeps going until a Japanese shell kills him outright. His men finish the job. By noon the pocket of remaining Japanese, about 500 men, is compressed into a few hundred yards at the eastern tip. Marines with flamethrowers and demolition charges move methodically from bunker to bunker. Some Japanese charge out with bayonets fixed. Most stay inside and die when the bunkers are set alight or blown shut. At 13:02 Colonel Shoup, hoarse, exhausted, and bleeding from half a dozen wounds, sends the message every Marine has been waiting for: casualties many. Percentage dead unknown. Combat efficiency, we are winning. By 16:30 the last shot is fired. Bishio is silent except for the sound of bulldozers pushing bodies into mass graves and the low moaning of the wounded waiting for evacuation. The numbers are brutal. Of the 18,000 Marines who came ashore or supported the landing, 3,407 are casualties, 1,009 killed or missing, 2,398 wounded. Nearly the entire assault force of the first day has been shot, burned, drowned, or blasted to pieces. Of the 4,836 Japanese and Korean defenders, 4,690 are dead. 17 Japanese and 129 Koreans are captured alive, most of them unconscious. The next morning, November 23rd, a Navy chaplain holds services on the beach. The congregation stands ankle-deep in coral sand still flecked with blood. A bulldozer operator pauses to remove his helmet. Out on the reef, Higgins boats, the ones the Japanese laughed at, are already ferrying in supplies for the next jump deeper into the Japanese Empire. The airfield is operational by December. B-24 Liberators land to refuel on their way to bomb the Marshall Islands. The road to Tokyo has been pried open at the cost of a generation of young American lives. Years later, veterans return. The jungle has swallowed the bunkers. Coconut palms grow where men once screamed. The reef is quiet again, lapping gently at the sand. Eddie Hayes, who made it through with nothing worse than coral cuts and a lifetime of nightmares, stands where he first came ashore. He pulls the yellowed letter from his wallet, the one he never had to mail, and reads it aloud to the wind. Betty is waiting back in Toledo. They married in the spring of 1946. They have 4 children and 8 grandchildren who know the story by heart. The Japanese laughed once at the American landing craft. They never laughed again. Tarawa was the first time America learned what modern war against a prepared defender really cost. The lessons, written in the blood of Ohio farm boys, Texas wildcatters, California surfers, and New York dockworkers, would save tens of thousands of lives in the battles still to come. The Higgins boats kept coming. The flag kept moving west. And the Pacific, vast and indifferent, carried the sound of freedom one island at a time. December 1943. The smoke has barely cleared from Bishio when the cables start flying back to Washington and Pearl Harbor. The photographs are horrifying, the reef littered with shattered landing craft, the beaches heaped with American dead, Marines wading through a slaughterhouse. Newspaper editors blanch. Congress demands answers. The Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, publicly calls Tarawa a terrible waste. Behind closed doors, Admiral Chester Nimitz convenes a board of inquiry that lasts weeks. The verdict is brutal but honest. The bombardment was too short, the tide tables were wrong, the intelligence underestimated the defenses, and there were not enough Amtraks. Nimitz does not fire anyone. Instead he issues new orders that are printed, distributed, and drilled into every Marine and sailor who will ever hit another beach. Pre-invasion bombardment will now be measured in days, not hours. Every atoll will get exhaustive tidal studies. Every division will have at least 300 Amtraks, not 125. And no assault will go in until carrier aircraft and old battleships have pounded the target until it looks like the surface of the moon. The blood of Tarawa buys the future. January 31st, 1944, just 70 days later. The next target is Kwajalein Atoll in the Marshall Islands. This time the bombardment lasts 4 full days. This time the Amtraks are plentiful and armored. This time the tide is right. American casualties are 1/4 of what they were at Tarawa for an island twice the size. The difference is not luck. It is 1,009 American boys who never came home from Bishio. Back in the United States, the country is just beginning to understand what happened. The first newsreel footage, shot by combat cameramen like Norman Hatch, reaches theaters in late December. Audiences sit in stunned silence as they watch Marines fall in the water, watch corpsmen drag the wounded through the surf, watch the bodies stacked like firewood. Theater managers report that women faint and grown men weep openly. Overnight, war bond sales skyrocket. Recruitment booths are mobbed. The phrase "Remember Tarawa" appears on posters beside "Remember Pearl Harbor." In Toledo, Ohio, Betty Lou Hayes waits for the Western Union boy on the bicycle the way every girl in America waits in 1943 and 1944. When the telegram finally comes, it says wounded slightly, expect return soon. Betty runs 8 blocks to the Hayes farm in her stocking feet, screaming the news so loud the neighbors think the war is over. In Knoxville, Tennessee, Mrs. Alexander Bonneman receives a different telegram. Then, weeks later, a Medal of Honor and a flag that has flown over the Capitol. She will hang both in the living room and never move them. In El Paso, Texas, the mother of Lieutenant William Dean Hawkins learns that her only son is being recommended for the medal as well. She will plant a cedar tree in the front yard that still stands today. Spring 1944. The Central Pacific Drive is in full swing. Majuro, Eniwetok, Saipan, Guam, each one taken faster, with fewer casualties, because the ghosts of Tarawa are riding in every Amtrak. Marines now carry a new weapon, the flamethrower with a longer range and a thicker gel that sticks and burns hotter. They also carry a new attitude. They have seen the worst the Japanese can offer and they know they can beat it. On Saipan in June, when Japanese civilians begin leaping from cliffs rather than surrender, the Marines remember the fanatics who fought to the last man on Bishio and are not surprised. On Tinian in July, when the island falls in 9 days instead of the expected 30, the veterans of Tarawa just nod. They taught the Pacific how to do this the hard way. The Higgins boats keep coming, thousands of them now rolling off assembly lines in New Orleans. Andrew Higgins, the cantankerous boat builder from Louisiana, is invited to the White House. President Roosevelt shakes his hand and says, "Mr. Higgins, those little boats of yours are winning us the war." Higgins, never at a loss for words, replies, "Mr. President, it ain't the boats. It's the boys inside 'em." Summer 1944. Eddie Hayes comes home on a hospital ship with coral still embedded in his knees and a purple heart he never talks about. He marries Betty Lou in the same Methodist church where they met at a sock hop in 1941. The best man is a Marine from Chicago who lost 3 fingers on Red Beach too. The maid of honor cries the whole ceremony because her own fiancé is still somewhere in France. They name their first son David, after Colonel Shoup. Fall 1944. The Philippines campaign begins. Marines who survived Tarawa now wade ashore at Peleliu and know, before the first shot is fired, that it will be another meat grinder. They are right. But they also know how to win it, slow, ugly, and methodical. The flamethrowers and the Amtraks and the longer bombardments all come from the lessons of that terrible November. February 1945. Iwo Jima. The flag goes up on Suribachi, and the photograph flashes around the world. One of the 6 men in that picture, pharmacist's mate 2nd Class John Bradley, was a Navy corpsman on Tarawa who dragged 50 wounded Marines out of the water on Red Beach too. He never told anyone until 50 years later. March 1945. Okinawa. The last and biggest battle of the Pacific. 180,000 American troops hit the beaches. Casualties are horrific, 12,000 dead, but the Japanese lose 10 times that. The fleet that supports the invasion includes 18 aircraft carriers and 1,200 Amtraks. Tarawa is a distant memory to most, but every piece of equipment and every tactic traces its lineage back to that blood-soaked coral sand. August 15, 1945. Japan surrenders. On the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, General Douglas MacArthur signs for the Allies. Among the American delegation stands a quiet Marine colonel with a limp, David M. Shoup. He is wearing the Medal of Honor he earned on Red Beach too. He thinks about the boys who never left Bishio and says nothing. September 2, 1945. VJ Day. Church bells ring from coast to coast. In Toledo, Eddie and Betty Hayes dance in the street with their baby son until 3 in the morning. In living rooms across America, mothers who lost sons on Tarawa light a candle and finally allow themselves to cry all the tears they have been holding back for 2 years. David M. Shoup becomes Commandant of the Marine Corps. One of his first acts is to order that every Marine officer read the official after-action report of Tarawa, cover to cover. It is still required reading at Quantico today. The survivors begin holding reunions. They meet every year on the weekend closest to November 20th. The first reunion is in a VFW hall in Columbus, Ohio. 37 men show up. By the 1980s the number is over 300. They bring their wives, their children, their grandchildren. They lay a wreath, drink a toast, and tell the same stories they have told 1,000 times. The young people listen in awe. The old men still wake up shouting in the night. 50 years after the battle, a joint American-Japanese memorial is dedicated on Bishio. Elderly Japanese veterans in dark suits stand beside elderly American veterans in blazers covered with medals. They bow to each other. Some cry. No one quite knows what to say, so they say nothing. The reef laps gently at the beach, the same reef that once ran red. The last known survivor of the Tarawa landing, a gentleman from Oregon named Jim Butterfield, dies at age 94. The Marine Corps sends a color guard. Taps is played. The flag is folded and presented to his daughter on a quiet atoll in the middle of the Pacific. The concrete bunkers are cracked and overgrown with vines. The runway the Seabees built in 1943 is still in use by the Kiribati Coast Guard. Children fish from the reef where Higgins' boats once burned. They have no idea that 82 years ago the fate of the world turned on this speck of coral. But every Marine who ever wears the eagle, globe, and anchor knows. They know about the boys who waded through blood to a seawall they could not see over. They know about Bonnerman on the bunker roof and Hawkins in the pillbox door and Shoop with blood in his boot. They know about Eddie Hayes and Jack O'Malley and the thousands whose names are carved on white crosses in Hawaii and in small-town cemeteries from Maine to California. And every November 20th, somewhere in America, a bugler plays taps at sunset, and an old man, or now his son or grandson, stands a little straighter, remembering the morning the Japanese laughed at American landing craft. And the 3 days that followed when those same boats carried the answer across a red lagoon and planted the American flag on the far side of the world.